a werewolf romance written by Olivia Smith. Fair warning, this one will make you feel everything. Prologue. When you discover that your worth was measured in 30 pieces of silver, the world doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks slowly, like ice beneath your feet, until you're drowning in the cold realization that the people who should have protected you were the ones who sold you. That's how my childhood ended. Not with tears or screams, but with the metallic clink of coins changing hands in a dirty marketplace, while my uncle counted his blood money and walked away without looking back. My name is Leora Ashwin, and I was 9 years old when I learned that love was a lie told by people who needed something from you. 9 years old when I stood on an auction block with dirt on my face and terror in my heart, watching strange men examine me like livestock. 9 years old when the Alpha King bought me, and my life became something I no longer recognized. They say he paid 30 silver coins for me, a fortune for a child with forbidden blood running through her veins. What they don't tell you is that some purchases are made not for profit, but for reasons that will haunt you forever. This is not a story about rescue. This is a story about survival, about the girl who became something more than her trauma, and about the king who refused to let her go, even when she begged him to. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the monsters who buy you are less dangerous than the family who sold you, and that freedom is something you have to fight for with your own clawed hands. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country, and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The Auction Block. The rope around my wrists had rubbed my skin raw, leaving angry red marks that burned with every movement. I stood on a wooden platform in the center of Greycroft Market, surrounded by hundreds of people who stared at me like I was something exotic and dangerous. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd, describing me in terms that made my stomach turn. Unusual eyes, suspected healer blood, orphaned and unclaimed. Each word felt like a stone being added to the weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to stand upright under the scrutiny of so many cold gazes. My Uncle Petron stood at the edge of the crowd, close enough that I could see the satisfaction on his weathered face as the bidding began. He'd raised me for 9 years after my parents died in a fire, fed me scraps from his table, and made sure I understood every single day that I was a burden he never wanted. This morning, he'd bragged to his drinking companions that he'd finally found a way to profit from his worthless niece with the demon eyes. The golden amber color of my irises had always marked me as different, possibly touched by wolf blood or healing magic, the kind of difference that made people either worship you or destroy you. In Greycroft, difference meant danger, and danger meant opportunity for men like my uncle. The bidding started at 5 silver coins. A merchant offered 10 for me to work in his brothel, promising to break in the strange-eyed girl proper. A mine owner bid 15, saying he needed small hands for the narrow tunnels where grown men couldn't reach. With each new bid, I felt myself becoming less human and more commodity, my future being decided by strangers who saw me as something to use until I broke. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but the guards flanking the platform had already demonstrated what happened to children who resisted. There were still bloodstains on the wood from yesterday's auction, dark brown reminders of consequence. Then the crowd went silent. I felt the shift before I understood it. A ripple of fear and respect that moved through the marketplace like wind through wheat. The auctioneer's voice faltered mid-sentence as someone approached from the back of the crowd, and even without seeing him, I knew he was different from everyone else here. The people parted for him like water around stone, creating a clear path that led directly to my platform. My eyes tracked his movement through the crowd, and when I finally saw him clearly, my breath caught in my throat with a fear that was different from anything I'd felt before. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, and a presence that made the air feel heavier wherever he stood. His hair was black as midnight, falling past his shoulders in a way that suggested he didn't care about convention or propriety. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. Wolf gold, ancient and knowing, fixing on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. He wore simple traveling clothes, all black leather and dark wool, but there was something in the way he moved that spoke of absolute authority. The guards stepped back from him instinctively, and the auctioneer's hand trembled as this stranger climbed the steps to my platform without asking permission. 30 silver, he said, his voice deep and rough like distant thunder. For the girl. No one else bids. It wasn't a request. It was a command, spoken with such finality that the entire marketplace held its breath. The auctioneer looked toward my uncle for confirmation. After all, Petrin had set a reserve price of 20 silver coins, and this offer exceeded it. My uncle's greedy eyes were already calculating his profit, nodding eagerly before the stranger's gold could disappear. 30 silver coins were placed in the auctioneer's shaking hands, the metal gleaming in the afternoon sun like pieces of my stolen future. The stranger cut the ropes, binding my wrists with a knife that appeared from nowhere, the blade so sharp I barely felt it slice through the thick hemp. Come, he said to me, his wolf-gold eyes holding mine with an expression I couldn't read. You belong to me now. Chapter 2. The Wolf King's Claim. His hand wrapped around my upper arm, not cruelly, but with enough firmness that I understood resistance was pointless. I stumbled down the platform steps, my legs weak from standing for hours in the hot sun, my mind reeling from the speed at which my life had just changed hands. The crowd parted for us as we walked, and I caught glimpses of my uncle collecting his 30 silver coins with trembling, greedy fingers. He didn't look at me, not even once. 9 years of his resentful care, and he couldn't meet my eyes as he sold me to a stranger. That moment crystallized something hard and cold in my chest, the final death of the child who'd believed family meant protection. We walked through Greycroft's winding streets in silence, my small legs struggling to match the stranger's long strides. I studied him from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what kind of man paid a fortune for a child at a market auction. His profile was sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. There was a scar running from his temple to his cheekbone, pale against his tanned skin, and I wondered what had given it to him. Everything about him radiated danger and control, from the predatory grace of his movement to the way his eyes constantly scanned our surroundings, as if expecting attack. I'd heard stories about men like him, wolf shifters who could change their shape, ancient beings who lived by laws older than human civilization. We reached the edge of town, where a massive black horse waited, its eyes rolling white when it caught my scent. The stranger lifted me onto the saddle as if I weighed nothing, then swung up behind me, his arms caging me in as he took the reins. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice directly above my head, rumbling through his chest and into my back. I almost didn't answer. What did names matter when you'd just been purchased like a sack of grain? But something in his tone made me respond. "Leora," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying earlier. "Leora Ashwin." He was silent for a long moment, and I felt his chest rise and fall with a deep breath. "I am Alaric Nightborn," he said finally, "Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and you, Leora Ashwin, are under my protection now." Protection. The word felt strange, almost foreign. I'd never been protected before, only tolerated, resented, and finally sold. "Why did you buy me?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. I needed to understand his purpose, to know what role I would play in whatever plan he had. Was I to be a servant? A curiosity? Something worse? The horse began moving, carrying us away from Greycroft and toward the dark forest that marked the border of the Northern Territories. Alaric's arms tightened slightly around me, steadying me in the saddle, and when he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Because I smelled your bloodline the moment I entered that marketplace," he said. "You're not human, Leora. You're a healer-born wolf, a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. And every predator in that crowd would have eventually realized what you are, and either killed you or used you until you wished for death." The world tilted sideways. Wolf blood, healer-born. The words made no sense, yet they resonated with something deep inside me that had always felt wrong, always felt other. My strange eyes, my ability to sense when people were lying, the way injuries healed faster on my skin than they should. These weren't human traits, but I'd never dared question them too closely. "I don't understand," I whispered, my hands gripping the saddle horn so tightly my knuckles turned white. "My parents were human. They died in a fire. Your mother was human." Alaric interrupted, his voice gentler now. "Your father was a healer-born wolf who fled the north to escape a blood curse. He hid among humans, fell in love, and died protecting the secret of what you are. The fire that killed your parents was no accident, Leora. It was murder, designed to eliminate the last of a bloodline that threatens the power structure of every wolf pack in existence." I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs turned solid, refusing to move in or out, as the implications of his words crashed over me like a wave. Murder, bloodline, threat. My entire understanding of my life had just been rewritten, and I was 9 years old, alone, and riding through a darkening forest with a wolf king who claimed I was something impossible. "Why would my bloodline threaten anyone?" I managed to ask, my voice breaking. Alaric's hand came up to rest lightly on my shoulder, a gesture that felt almost protective. "Because healer-born wolves can break mate bonds, cure silver poisoning, and neutralize the effects of an alpha's command," he explained. "In the wrong hands, you're a weapon that could destroy pack hierarchies and start wars. In the right hands, you're salvation for wolves suffering from curses and blood feuds that have lasted centuries. That's why I bought you, Leora. Not to use you, but to keep you safe until you're strong enough to choose your own path." I wanted to believe him. Gods, how I wanted to believe that someone in this world actually cared whether I lived or died. But trust was a luxury I'd learned to live without, and pretty words from a powerful stranger weren't enough to rebuild what my uncle had destroyed when he sold me for 30 silver coins. Chapter 3. The Castle of Shadows. We rode for 3 days through the Northern Territories, stopping only briefly for rest at way stations that seemed to materialize from the forest itself. Each shelter was staffed by silent wolf shifters, who bowed deeply to Alaric and eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. I learned to stay close to him during these stops, discovered that his presence created a protective bubble that kept the others at a respectful distance. At night, he would wrap me in his traveling cloak and sleep sitting upright against a tree, always between me and the door, always positioned to intercept danger before it reached me. I didn't understand why an Alpha King would personally guard a purchased child, but I was too exhausted and overwhelmed to question the small mercy of feeling safe for the first time in my life. On the 4th day, we crested a ridge, and I saw Thornhaven Castle rising from the mountain, like something from a nightmare or a dream. It was massive, built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with towers that clawed at the sky, and walls thick enough to withstand siege engines. A village sprawled at the castle's base, smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys, the sounds of life and commerce drifting up to where we sat on our horses. "This is your home now," Alaric said, his voice rumbling through his chest and into my back where I leaned against him. Home. The word felt too big, too impossible for someone like me who'd spent 9 years sleeping in a storage room and eating leftovers. I said nothing, just stared at the castle, and tried to imagine myself belonging to such a place. We descended into the village, and I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking our progress. These were wolf shifters, I realized. I could sense it in the way they moved, the predatory grace that marked them as something more than human. They watched me with naked curiosity, their enhanced senses no doubt picking up the strange combination of sense that marked me as both child and something other. Alaric guided our horse through the crowded streets without acknowledging the stares, his posture radiating an authority that made people step aside instinctively. We passed a market square where vendors sold everything from fresh meat to woven cloth, a training ground where young wolves practiced combat in human and beast form, and a temple dedicated to the moon goddess, whose silver statue gleamed in the afternoon light. The castle gates opened before we reached them, massive iron-bound doors swinging wide to reveal a courtyard filled with activity. Servants rushed forward to take our horses, guards snapped to attention, and a stern-faced woman in practical gray clothing approached with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "My lord," she said, bowing to Alaric, but letting her sharp eyes sweep over me with undisguised assessment. "We received your message about the child. The Eastern Tower room has been prepared as requested." Alaric dismounted in one fluid motion, then lifted me down from the saddle with the same careful strength he'd shown throughout our journey. "Leora, this is Maris, the head housekeeper of Thornhaven," he said, his hand remaining on my shoulder as if to anchor me to reality. "She'll see to your immediate needs while I attend to kingdom business that couldn't wait for my return." Maris stepped forward, her expression softening slightly as she took in my small frame, dirty clothes, and the raw marks on my wrists from the auction ropes. "Come, child," she said, her voice gentler than her appearance suggested. "Let's get you fed, bathed, and into clean clothes. You look half dead on your feet." I glanced up at Alaric, suddenly terrified of being separated from the one constant in my new reality. He must have seen the panic in my eyes, because he knelt down to my level, bringing his face even with mine. "You're safe here, Leora," he said quietly, his wolf gold eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "No one in this castle will harm you. That's a king's promise. And I don't break my word." He stood and walked away before I could respond, his black cloak swirling around him as he disappeared into the castle's depths, leaving me alone with Maris and the overwhelming reality of my new life. Maris led me through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, up spiral staircases that made my legs burn, past rooms filled with tapestries and weapons and furniture that probably cost more than my uncle's entire house. She maintained a steady stream of practical commentary as we walked. "The dining hall is down that corridor, breakfast is at dawn, the library is off limits without permission." Information that washed over me without sticking, because my mind was still trying to process everything that had happened in the past 4 days. We finally reached a door in the Eastern Tower, and when Maris pushed it open, I stepped into a room that made my chest tighten with emotions I couldn't name. It was beautiful, not ornate or overdone, but warm and comfortable in a way I'd never experienced. A large bed with soft blankets, a window seat overlooking the mountains, shelves waiting to be filled, and a writing desk with fresh paper and ink. "This is yours," Maris said, watching my reaction carefully. The Alpha King requested it be prepared for a child who'd known hardship and deserved softness. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling territory below, at the village and the forest, and the mountains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere in that vast landscape was my uncle, counting his 30 silver coins and drinking away his guilt. Somewhere out there was the truth about my parents' murder and the bloodline that made me valuable enough to kill or protect. And here, in this impossible castle, was a wolf king who'd bought me not to use me, but to keep me safe. I didn't cry. I was too numb for tears. But I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and whispered the question that would haunt me for years to come. What happens to me now? Chapter 4. The Healer's Gift. The first month at Thornhaven passed in a blur of overwhelming newness. Maris assigned me a tutor named Alara who taught me to read and write with a patience I'd never experienced before. I learned the castle's rhythms, the changing of the guards at dawn, the pack gatherings under the full moon, the way the entire household moved around Alaric's schedule like planets orbiting the sun. I was given clothes that fit, food that filled my belly, and a room that felt like a sanctuary after years of sleeping in storage closets. But despite all this comfort, I was desperately lonely, caught between two worlds and belonging to neither, too strange for the human servants, too young and powerless for the Wolfpack members who watched me with wary curiosity. Alaric remained a distant but constant presence in my life. He would appear in the library where I studied, checking on my progress with a few quiet words before disappearing again. He joined me for dinner twice a week, asking questions about my lessons and my adjustment to castle life, his attention focused and genuine in a way that made me forget he was a king. But he never explained why he'd bought me, never elaborated on the danger that supposedly hunted my bloodline, and never touched me except for those brief moments when his hand would rest on my shoulder, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. I began to understand that whatever his reasons for bringing me here, They were complicated by politics and pack dynamics I was too young to fully comprehend. Everything changed the night of the autumn moon ceremony. I was 10 years old, had been at Thornhaven for nearly a year, and Maris had finally given me permission to watch the pack rituals from the castle ramparts. The entire village gathered in the great clearing below, hundreds of wolves shifting between human and beast forms as they honored the moon goddess with songs that made my skin prickle with recognition. I stood at the stone wall, mesmerized by the beauty and power of my new people, when I felt it, a pull, deep in my chest, drawing me toward something in the crowd below. It was like a string had been tied around my heart, tugging me toward a specific point in the gathering, and when I focused on that feeling, I saw her. A young wolf, barely more than a pup, lay at the edge of the clearing with her mother hovering over her protectively. Even from this distance, I could see something was wrong. The pup's breathing was labored, her small body convulsing with pain, and the healers surrounding her wore expressions of helpless frustration. I didn't question the impulse that seized me. I ran from the ramparts, flew through the castle halls, burst out into the courtyard and sprinted toward the clearing with a certainty that defied logic. The crowd parted for me instinctively, creating a path to the suffering pup, and I fell to my knees beside her without understanding why my hands were already glowing with a soft, golden light that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside my bones. The healers backed away, shocked, as I placed my glowing hands on the pup's chest and felt the wrongness there. Poison, silver poisoning from a trap she'd triggered while playing in the forest. The knowledge came to me without words, flowing through my fingers like water seeking its level, and I understood instinctively what needed to be done. I poured my light into her small body, pulling the poison out strand by strand, neutralizing the silver corruption that was shutting down her organs, repairing the damage with a precision that should have been impossible for an untrained child. The pup's breathing eased, her convulsions stopped, and when I finally pulled my hands away, she opened her eyes and looked at me with wonder and recognition. The clearing had gone absolutely silent, hundreds of wolves staring at me with expressions ranging from awe to fear to something that looked almost like worship. Alaric appeared at my side, his hand wrapping around my shoulder with familiar weight, pulling me to my feet and against his side in a gesture that felt protective and possessive all at once. "She's healer-born," someone whispered in the crowd, the words spreading like wildfire through the gathered pack. "The child is healer-born. The legends are true." I looked up at Alaric, saw something fierce and complicated flash across his face. Pride, worry, vindication, and a grief I didn't understand. "You just revealed yourself to the entire pack," he said quietly, his words meant only for me. "There's no hiding what you are now, Leora. Everything changes from this moment forward, and I need you to trust me when I say that I will protect you from what comes next, even if it means making decisions that you're too young to understand." I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand the sudden tension in his body, and the way his eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for threats. But the pup's mother was kneeling before me with tears streaming down her face, pressing her forehead to my hands in a gesture of absolute gratitude, and I realized with stunning clarity that I'd just become something more than a purchased child in this pack. I'd become hope, possibility, and danger all wrapped together in one small body, and there was no going back to the invisible safety I'd known before. Chapter 5: The Price of Power. News of my healing spread through the Northern Territories like wildfire through dry grass. Within a week, wolves began arriving at Thornhaven from distant packs, injured warriors, sick children, elders suffering from curses that had plagued them for decades. They camped outside the castle gates, hundreds of desperate souls seeking the impossible salvation that only healer-born blood could provide. Alaric initially tried to turn them away, his face carved from stone as he refused audience after audience, but the crowds continued to grow, and with them grew whispers that the Alpha King was hoarding a precious resource that belonged to all wolfkind. I watched from my tower window as the political situation deteriorated, understanding for the first time that my gift was both miracle and weapon, depending on who controlled it. Maris found me in the library one afternoon, her expression troubled. "The king requests your presence in his private study," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "There are decisions to be made, child, and he believes you're old enough to have a voice in them." I followed her through the castle's winding corridors, my stomach tight with anxiety. I'd been at Thornhaven for over a year now, had grown several inches and learned to read and write with fluency, but I was still just 11 years old, far too young to navigate the political complexities that my existence had apparently created. The study door opened to reveal Alaric standing by a large window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon light, and when he turned to face me, I saw exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. I obeyed, folding my hands in my lap and waiting while he poured 2 cups of tea with movements that spoke of barely controlled tension. He handed me one, then settled into the chair across from mine, his wolf gold eyes studying me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. "You've seen the crowds outside," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "They're not going away, Leora. Every day brings more desperate wolves, more stories of suffering that only you can ease, and more political pressure from the pack councils demanding that I share your gift with all who need it." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The question is whether you're ready to bear that burden, and whether I have the right to protect you from it when so many are suffering." The weight of his words settled over me like a physical thing. I thought about the pup I'd saved, the light that had poured from my hands without conscious direction, the way my body had known instinctively how to pull poison from dying flesh. That gift wasn't something I'd asked for, wasn't something I'd trained or prepared for, but it was mine nonetheless, a legacy from the father I'd never known, and the bloodline that had gotten my parents killed. "What do you think I should do?" I asked, my voice small in the large room. Alaric leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, bringing his face closer to my level. "I think you should be allowed to be a child," he said quietly. "I think you should have years to grow and learn and understand your power before you're forced to use it. I think the world has already taken too much from you, and asking you to sacrifice more feels like a betrayal of the promise I made when I bought you from that auction block." His words made my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. No one had ever prioritized my childhood before, had ever suggested that my well-being mattered more than what I could provide for others. But I also couldn't ignore the weight of all those desperate souls outside the gates, couldn't pretend I didn't carry a power that could ease suffering I couldn't even imagine. "What if we compromise?" I heard myself say, the idea forming as I spoke. "What if I heal one person each week, someone chosen by you based on who needs it most, and the rest of the time I continue my studies and training until I'm older and stronger?" Alaric's expression shifted, something like pride flickering across his features. "That's wiser than anything my advisors have suggested," he said. "But it means years of watching people suffer who you could save immediately. Can you live with that weight, Leora?" I thought about my uncle, about the 30 silver coins that had been my purchase price, about the 9 years I'd spent being told I was worthless and burdensome. This power was the first thing in my life that was truly mine, that made me valuable for something other than what others could take from me. If I was going to bear the burden of this gift, it would be on my terms, at my pace, according to my own conscience rather than political pressure or pack hierarchies. "I can live with it," I said, meeting Alaric's eyes with as much strength as I could summon. "I can live with choosing who to save and who to let suffer, because at least I'll be the one making the choice instead of someone making it for me. That's more control than I've ever had in my life, and I won't give it up just because it's uncomfortable." Alaric stood, moved to my chair, and did something he'd never done before. He pulled me into a brief, fierce embrace that smelled like pine and leather and safety. "You're going to be magnificent when you grow up, Leora Ashwin," he murmured against my hair. "And I'm honored to be the one who gets to protect you until you're strong enough to protect yourself." In that moment, wrapped in the arms of the Wolf King who'd bought me for 30 silver coins, I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me all along. He hadn't purchased a slave or a weapon. He'd rescued a child and was trying desperately to give her the childhood that had been stolen, even as the world demanded she become something more than any child should have to be. Chapter 6. The Blood Moon Prophecy. On my 12th birthday, Alaric gave me a leather-bound journal and a confession that would change everything I thought I understood about my presence at Thornhaven. We sat in his private study, a space I'd grown comfortable in over the past 2 years, and watched snow fall beyond the windows while he spoke words that seemed to pain him. "I didn't buy you randomly at that auction," he said, his voice rough with something that sounded like guilt. "I'd been searching for you specifically, following rumors of a golden-eyed child in the Southern Territories. Your father and I were blood brothers before he fled the North, and I swore an oath to protect his bloodline if he ever fell. The fire that killed your parents triggered a magical signal that only I could sense, and I've spent the last 3 years tracking you through your uncle's movements, waiting for the moment when I could claim you legally without starting a war." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I'd believed about my rescue, that it had been chance, or instinct, or simple mercy, crumbled in the face of this new truth. "You knew my father?" I whispered, my hands trembling around the journal he'd given me. "You knew what I was before you ever saw me at that auction?" Alaric nodded, his wolf-gold eyes filled with something that looked like pain. "Your father was the finest healer the Northern Territories had ever produced, and he was my closest friend until the Blood Moon prophecy drove him into hiding. The seers foretold that his bloodline would produce a child capable of either saving or destroying the entire wolf nation, depending on who controlled her gift. He refused to let you be used as a political pawn, so he fled with your mother to the human lands, hoping distance would protect you from destiny." I stood abruptly, the journal falling from my lap to the floor, my mind reeling with implications I was only beginning to understand. "So I'm what? Some kind of prophesied weapon? Is that why you've been training me, educating me, teaching me to control my gift? So I can fulfill whatever role this prophecy demands?" My voice was rising, anger and betrayal mixing with the hurt of realizing that even Alaric's kindness had been calculated, purposeful, driven by ancient oaths rather than genuine care. He stood as well, moving toward me with careful deliberation, but I stepped back, creating distance between us. "No," he said firmly. "I've been training you so that when the prophecy comes for you, and it will, Leora, make no mistake about that, you'll be strong enough to choose your own path, instead of having it chosen for you." The snow outside fell harder, coating the world in white silence, while I struggled to process this new understanding of my life. "What does the prophecy actually say?" I asked, forcing my voice to steady. "If I'm supposedly important enough that my father had to die protecting me, I deserve to know what I'm supposed to save, or destroy." Alaric moved to his desk, unlocked a hidden drawer with a key that hung around his neck, and withdrew a scroll so old the parchment had yellowed with age. He unrolled it carefully, revealing text written in a language I couldn't read, accompanied by an illustration that made my blood run cold. A golden-eyed wolf standing at a crossroads, with one path leading to blooming life, and the other to scorched earth and bones. "When the blood moon rises in the year of prophecy," Alaric read, translating the ancient script, "the healer-born child shall stand between two destinies. Claimed by power, she brings dominion and death. Claimed by love, she brings healing and hope. The wolf who holds her heart shall determine which path the world walks, and no force of earth or heaven shall alter what is written in blood and bond." He looked up from the scroll, his expression grave. "The year of prophecy is next year, Leora. On your 13th birthday, during the blood moon, you'll come into your full power. And according to the prophecy, whoever holds your heart at that moment, whoever you've bonded with emotionally or magically, will determine whether your gift becomes a weapon of destruction or a force of healing for all wolfkind." The words landed like stones in my chest. I was 12 years old, standing in a tower room with snow falling outside, learning that my entire future, and apparently the fate of an entire species, hinged on something as fragile and unpredictable as where I chose to give my heart. "That's insane," I said flatly. "You can't build the future of wolfkind on the romantic feelings of a 13-year-old child. That's not prophecy, that's madness." Alaric's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Most prophecies are madness," he agreed. but they're also usually accurate in ways we don't understand until after they've come to pass. Which is why I've spent 3 years trying to give you the tools to make your own choices. Education, control over your gift, understanding of pack politics, and the strength to stand against anyone who tries to force you into a role you don't choose. I moved to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, watching the snow bury the world outside. Somewhere beyond these castle walls were people who would want to use me, control me, possess me, in order to fulfill whichever version of the prophecy served their interests. And here, in this room, was the man who'd bought me for 30 silver coins and claimed it was to protect me from that exact fate. "Do you want my heart?" I asked without turning around, the question barely more than a whisper. "Is that what this has all been about? Earning my loyalty so that when the blood moon comes, I'll choose to bond with you instead of someone who might use my power for destruction?" The silence stretched so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was closer than I expected, as if he'd moved to stand directly behind me. "I want you to be free, Leora," he said quietly. "I want you to reach your 13th birthday with enough strength and knowledge to choose your own destiny, regardless of what ancient prophecies demand. And if that means you give your heart to someone else, or to no one at all, I'll protect that choice with my life, because that's what your father would have wanted, and what I promised him I would do." I turned to face him then, searching his expression for the lie, for the manipulation, for the ulterior motive that surely had to be hiding beneath such noble words. But all I saw was a tired king who'd carried the weight of an impossible promise for 3 years and was trying desperately not to fail the friend he'd lost and the child he'd sworn to protect. In that moment, I understood that the most dangerous part of the prophecy wasn't the choice between destruction and healing. It was the fact that I was already beginning to care for the man who stood between me and every threat the world could offer. And caring for someone meant giving them the power to hurt you in ways no enemy ever could. Chapter 7: The Rival Packs. The spring I turned 13 brought more than just the approaching blood moon. It brought war to Thornhaven's gates. 3 rival packs, having learned of the prophecy through sources Alaric couldn't identify, arrived within days of each other to negotiate for my future. The Eastern Ridge Pack sent Varric Stonehowl, a battle-scarred warrior who offered a political alliance in exchange for my hand in marriage once I came of age. The Southern Marsh Pack dispatched Draven Hollowclaw, who proposed I be trained as his pack's healer under his personal supervision. And the Western Valley Pack sent Kylum Frostvane, who didn't bother with pretense. He simply stated that his pack would take me by force if necessary, because they refused to let the Northern Territories monopolize a resource that belonged to all wolfkind. I attended these negotiations from a chair beside Alaric's throne, dressed in fine clothes that Maris had insisted made me look like a proper northern lady rather than a purchased child. Each pack representative studied me with eyes that saw only my utility, my potential, my prophesied power, never the frightened girl beneath the composed exterior. Alaric rejected each proposal with diplomatic firmness that barely concealed the threat underneath his words. "The child is under my protection by sacred oath and legal claim," he stated to each delegation. "Any attempt to remove her from Thornhaven will be considered an act of war against the Northern Territories, and I promise you that war with me will cost more than any prophecy is worth." But threats only worked when the other side believed you'd follow through, and the rival packs had clearly decided that Alaric's attachment to me was a weakness they could exploit. The attacks began subtly: a poisoned gift delivered to my room, a hunting accident in the forest where I took my daily walks, a serving girl bribed to drug my evening tea. Each attempt was thwarted by the elaborate security Alaric had built around me, but the message was clear. If they couldn't take me through negotiation, they'd try other methods. I felt like a piece on a game board, moved and protected and threatened according to strategies I only partially understood, my value determined entirely by power I hadn't asked for and couldn't escape. The worst part wasn't the danger. It was watching what it did to Alaric. He stopped sleeping, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion from personally inspecting every inch of castle security multiple times per day. He dismissed advisors who suggested compromise, executed servants who'd been compromised by rival packs, and implemented restrictions that turned Thornhaven from a home into a fortress. And through it all, he maintained a distance from me that hurt more than any assassination attempt, as if afraid that showing too much care would somehow fulfill the prophecy and rob me of choice. I understood his reasoning. If the prophecy required me to give my heart to someone, he was determined not to manipulate that outcome, but understanding didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. Everything came to a head the night Varek Stonehowl led a covert strike team through Thornhaven's northern wall, bypassing every security measure through a combination of inside intelligence and desperate audacity. I woke to the sound of fighting in the corridors, to the clash of steel and the snarls of wolves in combat, and knew with horrible certainty that they'd come for me. My door burst open to reveal not attackers, but Alaric, blood-spattered and fierce, his eyes blazing with something beyond human rage. "Get behind me," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of an alpha's absolute authority. "And no matter what happens, do not use your healing gift. They want you alive, which means they won't kill you, but if they see you heal their wounded, they'll know exactly how valuable you are, and they'll never stop coming." The next hours were a nightmare of violence and terror. Alaric fought with a brutality I'd never witnessed before, his human form as deadly as his wolf, cutting through Varek's strike team with precision that spoke of centuries of combat experience. But numbers eventually overwhelmed even his skill, and when Varek himself finally faced Alaric in my doorway, I saw what prophecy had brought us to. Two powerful wolves fighting to the death over possession of a 13-year-old girl who just wanted to be left alone. Varek was younger, faster, and fought with the desperation of someone who believed he was saving the world by claiming me. Alaric was older, more experienced, and fought with the cold certainty of someone protecting what was his by oath and choice. The fight destroyed my room. Furniture splintered, tapestries torn, the beautiful window seat where I'd spent countless hours smashed beneath their struggling bodies. I pressed myself into the corner, watching in horror as these two powerful wolves tore chunks from each other, blood painting the walls in arterial sprays that would haunt my dreams for years. When Alaric finally got his jaws around Varek's throat in wolf form, I screamed for him to stop, not to kill, not to make me responsible for another death in this endless cycle of violence. He paused, golden eyes meeting mine across the destroyed room, Varek's life pulsing beneath his teeth, and I saw the question there. Was mercy worth the risk that Varek would return with greater force, or should he end this threat permanently? "Please," I whispered, and that single word made the decision. Alaric released Varek's throat, shifted back to human form, and spoke words that carried the weight of absolute command. "Tell your pack that the healer-born child will never be yours," he said, his voice steady, despite the blood pouring from a dozen wounds. "Tell them that I've claimed her as my ward, and my future mate, and any wolf who challenges that claim challenges the entire Northern Territories. The prophecy will unfold as it must, but it will unfold here, under my protection, or it will unfold over my corpse." The declaration rang through the castle like a bell, and I felt something shift in the air between us, a claiming that went beyond words, beyond politics, beyond even prophecy. Alaric had just publicly declared his intention to be the one who held my heart, when the blood moon rose, had committed the Northern Territories to war if necessary to protect that choice, and had done it all while giving me the option to refuse when the time came. As guards arrived to drag Varek away and healers rushed to tend Alaric's wounds, I realized that the prophecy's timeline was no longer theoretical. We had months, maybe weeks, before the rival packs forced a confrontation that would determine not just my future, but the fate of every wolf in the territories. And standing between me and that destiny was a king who'd just bet everything on the hope that a girl he'd bought for 30 silver coins might choose him freely when the moment of decision finally arrived. Chapter 8: The Choice of Heart. The weeks following Varek's attack transformed Thornhaven into an armed camp. Alaric called in every favor, activated every alliance, and assembled a force capable of defending against the combined might of the rival packs, who now openly declared their intention to claim me before the blood moon. I watched from my tower as warriors arrived daily, setting up camps in the valley below, their numbers swelling until it seemed the entire north had mobilized for war. And at the center of it all was me, a 13-year-old girl whose only crime was being born with blood that could heal or destroy, depending on prophecy and politics I still barely understood. Alaric's wounds from the fight with Varric had been severe, but he refused my offer to heal them, insisting he'd rather bear scars than risk me using power that would broadcast my capabilities to every pack with spies in Thornhaven. So I watched him move through the castle with a pronounced limp, saw him favor his left side, where Varric's claws had torn through muscle and possibly cracked ribs, and felt guilt eat at me because his suffering was directly tied to protecting me. "Stop looking at me like that," he said one evening, catching me watching him from across the war room, where he planned defenses with his generals. "I've survived worse injuries in battles that mattered far less than you do." His words were meant to comfort, but they only made the weight heavier. I was 13 years old, and a king was willing to die to prevent others from possessing me. The full moon before the blood moon brought a temporary ceasefire, an old tradition that even the rival packs honored. Alaric used the pause in hostilities to do something unexpected. He invited me to join him for the pack gathering in the sacred grove, where wolves honored the moon goddess with songs and rituals older than written history. "You've lived among us for 4 years," he said, "but you've never truly run with the pack. Before the blood moon forces your choice, I want you to understand what it means to be wolfkind, to feel the call of the moon and the bond of pack, so that whatever decision you make is based on truth rather than fear." I'd never shifted before. My power manifested differently than traditional wolf blood, but something in his voice made me trust that this was important. The grove was sacred ground where magic pooled thick enough to taste. Hundreds of wolves gathered in both forms, their song rising to the moon in harmonies that seemed to resonate in my bones. Alaric stood beside me in human form, his presence a steady anchor as the pack magic swirled around us, calling to the dormant wolf blood in my veins. "Let go," he murmured, his hand warm on my shoulder. "Stop fighting what you are, and let the transformation come naturally." I closed my eyes and reached for the wildness I'd always suppressed, the part of me that was more than human, that carried the legacy of my murdered father and the prophecy that hung over my future like a sword. The shift was agony and ecstasy combined. Bones breaking and reforming, muscles tearing and rebuilding, senses exploding into overwhelming clarity as I became something that was neither fully human nor fully wolf. When it was complete, I stood on 4 legs with silver white fur and eyes that glowed golden in the moonlight, and I felt Alaric's presence beside me in his massive black wolf form, his size dwarfing mine, his power evident in every line of his body. He touched his nose to mine in a gesture of welcome, and suddenly I understood what pack meant. Not the politics or the territories or the prophecies, but this connection to something ancient and wild and beautiful that transcended human understanding. We ran together through the forest, and I'd never felt so free. The pack moved around us like a living river, accepting me into their flow without question, and I realized that this was what Alaric had been trying to give me all along, not protection from destiny, but understanding of what I was choosing between. When we finally returned to the grove as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, shifting back to human form left me breathless and aching and more alive than I'd ever felt. Alaric wrapped his cloak around my shivering form and pulled me against his chest, and I felt his heart hammering in rhythm with mine, felt the bond between us pulse with something deeper than politics or prophecy. "The blood moon is in 3 days," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion I'd never heard from him before. "The rival packs will attack when it rises, attempting to either claim you or destroy me so you'll be unprotected. We'll fight them, and we'll probably win, but there are no guarantees in war." He paused, his arms tightening around me. "Before the battle comes, I need you to know something, Leora. I didn't buy you because of the prophecy. I bought you because you were a terrified child who deserved better than what the world had given you, and every choice I've made since then has been about trying to give you the freedom to become whoever you're meant to be. If the prophecy requires you to give your heart to someone, I want it to be your choice, made freely, without obligation or debt or fear of consequences." He pulled back enough to look down at me, his wolf gold eyes filled with something that made my breath catch. "But I also need you to know that somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my blood brother's child and started seeing you as someone I can't imagine my life without. So if you choose to give your heart to me when the blood moon rises, I'll cherish it as the greatest gift I've ever received. And if you choose differently, I'll still protect you with everything I am. Because that's what love means, putting someone else's freedom above your own desires." I stared up at him, this powerful king who'd bought me for 30 silver coins and was now offering me something no one in my life had ever given: the freedom to choose my own destiny without pressure or manipulation or fear. The prophecy said whoever held my heart would determine my path, would decide whether my gift became weapon or salvation. But standing in Alaric's arms, with dawn breaking around us and war coming in 3 days, I realized the prophecy had always misunderstood the important question. It wasn't about who would control my power, but about who I would trust enough to be vulnerable with, who I would choose to stand beside as I figured out what my gift was meant to become. And in that moment, with his heartbeat steady beneath my palm, and his eyes holding mine with painful honesty, I made my choice. Chapter 9. The Blood Moon Rises. The blood moon rose exactly as the prophecy foretold, enormous and crimson, hanging in the sky like a wound in the heavens, while 3 rival packs descended on Thornhaven with the fury of those who believed they were saving the world. I stood on the castle ramparts in a dress of midnight blue, my hands glowing with the power that had come fully awake when the moon began its rise, and watched thousands of wolves converge on the castle where I'd lived for 4 years. Alaric stood beside me in full war regalia, his face carved from stone but his hand wrapped tightly around mine. A silent declaration that we faced this together, prophecy or no prophecy. The battle was brutal, visceral, and terrifying in its scope. 3 packs that should have been enemies had formed an alliance based on their conviction that Alaric would use my gift to dominate all wolfkind, that his claim on me was tyranny rather than protection. They fought with the desperation of those who believed they were heroes, preventing a dictator from possessing ultimate power, and watching them die for that conviction made me sick with the weight of everything my existence had cost. Alaric's forces held the walls through superior position and desperate determination, but numbers slowly overwhelmed strategy, and I knew with horrible certainty that we were going to lose unless I did something that would change the nature of this conflict. "I have to go to them," I said, pulling my hand from Alaric's grip. "I have to show them that I'm not a weapon to be controlled, that the prophecy doesn't mean what they think it means." He turned to me with fear and pride warring in his expression. "If you go out there, they'll tear you apart trying to claim you," he said flatly. "The prophecy says whoever holds your heart determines your path. They'll interpret that as whoever physically possesses you, and I'll have to watch you die trying to save wolves who want to enslave you." I met his eyes. This king who'd bought me and protected me, and loved me enough to let me choose, and I felt the truth settle into my bones with absolute certainty. "The prophecy doesn't work that way," I said softly. "It's not about possession or control. It's about trust and choice, and where I decide to give the most vulnerable parts of myself." I walked onto the battlefield before Alaric could stop me, my hands blazing with golden light that cut through the night like a second moon. The fighting stuttered to a halt as thousands of wolves turned to stare at the glowing girl who stood alone in the space between armies. "Stop," I commanded, and my voice carried power I'd never accessed before, not just healing, but authority, the ability to command the very magic that ran through wolf blood. "You're killing each other over a prophecy you don't understand, over a gift you think can be owned or controlled. But you're wrong." I raised my hands higher, letting my power expand until every wolf on that battlefield could feel it washing over them, could sense the potential within it. This gift doesn't belong to whoever possesses me. It belongs to whoever I trust enough to be vulnerable with, whoever I choose to give my heart to freely and without coercion. Varric Stonehowl stepped forward from the Eastern Ridge forces, his earlier wounds healed, but his eyes still burning with conviction. "Then choose?" he demanded. "Choose now, while all the packs can witness it, and let the prophecy be fulfilled so this war can end." I looked at the assembled wolves, hundreds of warriors who'd traveled across territories, who'd left their families, and risked their lives based on ancient words written by seers who'd never imagined the actual human cost of their predictions. "I choose Alaric Nightborn," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the battlefield. "Not because he bought me, or saved me, or protected me, though he did all those things. I choose him because he's the only person in my life who's ever prioritized my freedom over my utility, who saw me as a child who deserved a childhood, rather than a resource to be exploited." The power within me surged in response to the declaration, and I felt something fundamental shift in the magic that connected me to all wolfkind. The prophecy had said whoever held my heart would determine my path, would decide whether my gift brought dominion or healing. But the prophecy had assumed that choice would be made through control, through possession, through one person wielding my power as a weapon. What the ancient seers had never anticipated was that I might give my heart to someone who would refuse to wield that power at all, who would give it back to me to use according to my own conscience. "The healer-born child shall stand between two destinies," I recited, remembering Alaric's translation of the ancient words. "Claimed by power, she brings dominion and death. Claimed by love, she brings healing and hope." I turned to face Alaric where he stood on the ramparts, his expression carved from wonder and relief. "I was never meant to be claimed by someone who wanted power over others," I called out. "I was meant to be claimed by someone who wanted power for me, the power to choose my own path, to control my own gift, to determine my own destiny." The magic within me crystallized into something new. Not just the ability to heal, but the understanding of how to use that gift without it consuming me. I turned back to the battlefield and let my power flow outward, touching every wounded wolf with golden light that healed injuries and soothed pain, demonstrating the true nature of what the prophecy had foretold. This wasn't a power that would let me dominate other wolves. It was a gift that would let me serve them according to my own values, healing those I chose to heal, refusing those who sought to use me as a weapon, and answering to no authority except my own conscience and the king who taught me that freedom was worth more than safety or power. The rival packs stood stunned, watching their wounded stand healed, feeling the power wash over them without coercion or control, and I saw understanding dawn in faces that had been twisted with battle fury moments before. Kylam Frostvine was the first to kneel, dropping to one knee in a gesture of respect rather than submission. "The prophecy is fulfilled," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "The healer-born chose love over power, and her gift becomes healing rather than dominion. We were wrong to believe we needed to control her to prevent catastrophe. The real catastrophe would have been succeeding." One by one, the warriors from all three packs lowered their weapons and knelt, acknowledging what the blood moon had revealed, that the greatest power wasn't the ability to control others, but the freedom to choose your own path and use your gifts according to your own conscience. And standing at the center of that revelation was a 13-year-old girl who'd been bought for 30 silver coins and had just changed the fate of every wolf in the territories by choosing to give her heart to the one person who'd never asked for it. Chapter 10. The Healer's Throne. 5 years after the blood moon, I stood in the same castle where Alaric had first brought me as a terrified 9-year-old child, but everything had changed. The Eastern Tower room that had once been my sanctuary was now filled with medical texts and healing supplies, transformed into a workspace where I trained other healer-born wolves who'd emerged after the prophecy proved that our bloodline could thrive without fear. The rival packs that had once sought to claim me now sent their sick and wounded with requests rather than demands, understanding that healing was a gift I offered freely rather than a resource they could command. And Thornhaven itself had evolved from fortress to sanctuary, a place where wolves came not just for physical healing, but for the understanding that power used in service of others was more valuable than power used to control them. Alaric found me in the healing wing, reviewing cases submitted by the Southern Marsh Pack for consideration. He'd aged in the 5 years since the blood moon. There was silver threading through his dark hair now, lines around his eyes that spoke of the weight of leadership. But he still moved with the same predatory grace that had terrified and fascinated me that first day at the auction. "You're doing it again," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with familiar ease. "Working past midnight when you should be resting." I looked up from the requests, letting my eyes trace the face I'd come to know better than my own. "A child in the Southern Territories is dying of silver poisoning," I said quietly. "The same poison that nearly killed that pup 5 years ago. I can save her, but it means traveling to their lands, and your advisors will argue it's too dangerous." Alaric's expression softened with something that looked like pride mixed with exasperation. "My advisors have been arguing that you're too valuable to risk for 5 years, he said. "And for 5 years you've ignored them and done what your conscience demanded. Why would tonight be different?" He paused, studying me with eyes that still held the wolf gold intensity that had captured my attention all those years ago. "You're 18 now, Leora. Old enough to make your own decisions without my permission or protection. The question isn't whether I'll allow you to go. It's whether you'll allow me to come with you, because I'm not particularly interested in spending 3 days worrying about you traveling alone through territory that still has wolves who'd love to possess your gift." I stood and moved around the desk, settling into the chair beside him rather than across from him, a small intimacy that had developed over years of working together, of him teaching me statecraft and pack politics, while I taught him that healing was as much about listening as it was about magic. "The prophecy said whoever held my heart would determine my path," I said softly, "but it never specified what kind of heart we were talking about. I gave you my heart when I was 13, because you were the only person who'd ever prioritized my freedom. But I give you my heart again now, at 18, because you've spent 5 years proving that love means supporting someone's choices even when they terrify you." I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his in a gesture that had become natural as breathing. "So yes, I'll allow you to come with me to the Southern Territories. I'll allow you to stand beside me while I heal that child, and I'll allow you to continue being the person who reminds me that power is only meaningful when it's used in service of something greater than yourself." Alaric pulled me from my chair into his lap, wrapping his arms around me with a possessiveness that had taken years to develop, that had waited patiently for me to grow from traumatized child into a woman who could choose him freely without the shadow of debt or obligation. "I bought you for 30 silver coins, he murmured against my hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Best money I ever spent, though I suspect your uncle would be horrified to know that the worthless niece with demon eyes is now the most powerful healer in the Northern Territories, and the woman I intend to make my queen." The casual reference to marriage made my breath catch. We'd danced around the topic for months, both aware that declaring our intention to mate would have political implications that reached far beyond personal choice. "Your pack won't accept a queen who was bought as a child slave," I said, voicing the concern that had kept me from pushing this conversation forward. "They'll see it as weakness, as the Alpha King being controlled by the prophecy, rather than making a strategic political alliance." Alaric's laugh was low and genuine, rumbling through his chest and into mine, where I leaned against him. "My pack watched you heal their children, fight for their wounded, and refuse to let your gift be used as a weapon even when it would have been politically advantageous," he said. "They don't see you as a slave I bought. They see you as the healer who chose to give her gift in service, rather than dominion. And if anyone objects to me making you my queen, they're welcome to challenge me for the position. I suspect they'll find I'm significantly more dangerous when fighting to keep you than I ever was when fighting to claim you." The weight of his words settled over me like a cloak, not heavy or oppressive, but warm and protective and right. I thought about the terrified 9-year-old who'd stood on an auction block, about the 30 silver coins that had been her purchase price, about the prophecy that had hung over her future like a death sentence. That girl had been certain she'd never be more than what others could take from her, had believed love was a lie and safety was impossible. But she'd been wrong, because here, in the arms of a wolf king who'd bet his kingdom on her freedom, she'd found something the prophecy had never anticipated. A love built on choice rather than destiny, on respect rather than possession, on partnership rather than control. Then I suppose we should start planning a wedding, I said, tilting my face up to meet his kiss. Though fair warning, I intend to be a very inconvenient queen who'll keep disappearing into dangerous territories to heal sick children, much to the horror of your advisors. Alaric's smile against my lips was fierce and proud. I expect nothing less, he murmured. After all, I didn't spend 5 years teaching you to be a proper royal. I spent 5 years teaching you to be powerful enough that no one, not me, not the pack, not even prophecy itself, could tell you who you're allowed to become. Outside the window, the moon rose over Thornhaven, illuminating the territory that had become home not through purchase or prophecy, but through the simple truth that freedom and love were worth fighting for. And somewhere in the distance, a child waited for healing that only I could provide, a reminder that the greatest power wasn't the ability to control others, but the choice to serve them according to your own conscience. The prophecy had been fulfilled 5 years ago when I chose love over power, but the real story had never been about destiny or ancient magic. It had always been about a girl who was bought for 30 silver coins and refused to let that purchase price define her worth, and a king who loved her enough to bet everything on her freedom. Together, we'd build a future where power meant service, where love meant choice, and where a healer-born queen could transform the Northern Territories not through dominion, but through the revolutionary act of using her gift to heal rather than control. And it all started with 30 silver coins and a king who refused to let her go. The end. Thank you so much for reading Leora and Alaric's story. If you felt the weight of these words, if you connected with Leora's journey from brokenness to power, drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest. And if you want more stories like this, stories about broken people becoming whole, about love that heals rather than controls, about power used in service rather than dominion, subscribe to this channel and let me know what kind of tale you want to hear next. Until then, remember, your worth was never determined by the price someone paid for you. You are valuable because you exist, because you have gifts that only you can give, and because you have the power to choose who gets to hold your heart. Stay strong, stay free, and I'll see you in the next story.